and welcome to the links! In today's video, I'll show you how I created my entry for Dollightfuls Tropical Mega Collaboration. I was so excited when she announced it, but I had to finish my last doll first, so I was running a little low on time. Nevertheless, I wanted to participate, so I brainstormed a little what to make. I decided to go with the first thing that came to my mind when thinking of tropical, and that was an island, with white beaches and crystal clear water. From that, I developed my idea step by step, as you will see during the video. But let's just start, right? For the base, I chose this Cleo doll because of her pointy face. She should have been some sort of majestic island queen, so I wanted a doll with a more adult look, and Cleo seemed a very good choice. I mean, look how fabulous she already is! As always, I prepared the doll by removing factory painted hair and separated body and head. Last time, the head cap and the head shrunk differently, so I just made a cut in the back of her head this time for the shrinking process. I also sanded the body and removed the print-on panties. It worked really nice this time, guess I'm getting better. Every of my dolls nowadays has inserted eyes, and she should have been no exception. After sketching out the shape on the plastic with a normal pencil, I went in with my X-Acto knife to cut out the eye holes. I have to admit that I was a little impatient this time, so I accidentally cut outside the shape in the plastic of her head. Like I already said, I wanted to shrink her head again, so I did the cutting pretty messy, as you can see, to adjust them after every shrinking process. But let's stop talking and put her in the acetone. After 3 hours, I removed her from the chemical, but the material got so soft that her complete head broke while I removed her. I was in shock. Luckily, her face only got a little crack on her forehead, but her eyes also looked pretty bad. I really was thinking of using another head, but I did not want to give her up so easily. So I let her dry for 12 hours and dunked her in the acetone again for another shrinking session, in hope the damage won't get worse. Meanwhile, I worked a little on her body. A smaller head makes the neck look way too long, so I decided to shorten it this time for a more natural look. Careful not to destroy the neck pack, I removed the neck from the body and cut out a little piece. The next thing I wanted to change was her feet. When I think of tropical, ocean and sun, I think of barefoot on the sand, so I wanted to give her flat feet. For that, I just removed the middle of hers to have the little toe separated. After a little sanding, I connected all the pieces with wire and hot glue to have something for the epoxy to hold on to. I set everything to dry and came back the next day for sanding everything smooth. At this point, I saw that her feet were a little different, so right one was still too much high-heeled, but I thought it may give her an elegant look, so I started working on the material with my hand drummer. After a while of sanding, I decided that I was definitely not happy with her foot, so I destroyed my work again to be able to rebuild it. I also gave the other foot a little more epoxy for a better shape and set everything to dry again. In the meantime, her head was ready to get some attention again. For Taya, I shrunk her head 3 times, but the plastic of Cleo was much more soft, so I only went with 2 shrinking sessions this time. Luckily, her damage did not get worse, and her eyes looked good by now, so I was able to work with her. As a comparison, I took a normal Draculaura head again, so you can see the shrinking result better. The next step was the reroot. For that, I wanted to use different shades of green and a yellow yarn to symbolize the plant growing on an island. First, I painted her head to have a rough guideline where to root which color, and to make the hair look a little fuller in the end. With Taya, I did not use the hairline given in the neck, but made my own, a lot closer to the neck. This time I did this again because it looked much better in my opinion, and I don't regret it. After the paint dried, it was time for the reroot. As always, I prepared a few strands of acrylic yarn and took my long needle and scissors. The yellow part had no pre-punched holes, because I lowered the hairline, as you remember. Therefore, I punched a new hole in the plastic with the pointy end of the needle and get the needle eye through afterwards. Then I took a strand of yarn, made a knot on one end and threaded it. After pulling the needle with the yarn through the plastic, you have your first hair. This method takes a little while, but you don't have to glue the hair inside the head afterwards, and yarn hair can end up pretty long because you don't have to fold it in half like you do with the classic rerooting method. When I was done, she looked like this. And I had a blister on my finger. Everything for the art, right? If you know me, you surely know that I really like body mods and incorporate animal features in my customs. This time I wanted to integrate an animal too, but had trouble deciding on one. I was thinking of tropical fishes, but my last doll was a sea creature. Then I thought of tropical birds, but until now I've never seen a bird custom that I liked, and I personally had no idea how to make a bird doll that I would like. After a little thinking, I decided to take a turtle. It was the perfect candidate because they live in the ocean but come to the beaches to lay their eggs. So an island doll with turtle features was just perfect fit in my opinion. Nevertheless, I wanted to go pretty minimal on her turtle mods because I had another modding plan for her legs, so I went with some scales on her face. To do so, I covered her hair with kitchen foil to keep it protected from the epoxy clay, and started sculpting on her forehead and nose bridge. For the scales, I took a reference photo from an actual turtle head. Speaking of epoxy, I wanted to add some mods on her legs, but first, let's see how our new foot came out. I already sanded it and it looked much better at this point. I'm very happy that I redid it. Like I said, she's an island, so I plan to represent the earth with her skin color, the plants with her hair, and the water with her legs. Therefore, I built some corals on her legs with epoxy clay. To get them right, I again searched for some reference photos on Google. I know they look a little creepy at this point, but wait for the color. But to color them, they had to dry first, of course. After that, I sanded them and added a little more structure to them. Again, I realized that it's much easier for me to add details with my Dremel than by sculpting them in the first place. But I guess it's personal preference after all. I covered everything with Liquitex matte medium so the color would have a good hold on the doll, and after it dried, I went in with my acrylic paints. The first thing I painted was the scales on her head. I chose a dark green as a base because I thought of something vivid with greens, yellows and turquoise, but I changed the colors like 100 times until I finally got something that looked like a turtle. But more of that later. For her water legs, I chose a gradient from dark to light blue, like actual water running out on the beach. For the base, I also colored her corals with a blue to have an easier time with the gradient, but no worries, they got a lot more colorful later. While the acrylic paint on the legs was drying, I started with the face-up. To do so, I sprayed her face with Mr. Super Clear sealant and took my watercolor pencils and soft pastels. First, I started with blushing her lips, cheeks, nose and a little around her eyes. I always use pastels for lips instead of acrylic paints or pencils, because it gives them softer edges and a more natural look in my opinion. But like always, personal preference. For her eyeshadow, I decided to use a vibrant orange color, but on the plastic it looked much more dull. Nevertheless, a very nice base for her eyeshadow. Then my pencils entered the game by drawing the waterline with a very light flesh color and upper eyeline with a straight black pencil. This time I wanted to try a little winged eyeliner. At this point it's maybe worth mentioning that I have absolutely no experience with makeup, so I just improvise. A little more intensifying the colors with my watercolor pencils, plus adding a tattoo under her eye, and it was time for another layer of sealant. After it dried, I came back and as you can see, I painted her scales in a more skin colorish color, because they were not going in a direction I liked. Then I basically repeated all the steps from before to give the face more depth. And then I gave it one more layer of sealant. The last face-up step was dedicated to the scales. I blushed them in dark brown and tried to lighten up the lines in between because I looked at some reference pictures of turtle heads again and they all had very light skin with dark scales, so I went with that. But in my head there was still stuck that they had to be green somehow, so I went in with my pencils and ruined everything again, yay! Like I mentioned, I really struggled with them for some reason. I later painted them straight brown again and that looked much better, as you will see later. But now it was time for the body blushing. The first thing was my trial to hide the epoxy at the neck, but the acrylic paint I chose was pretty wrong, so it was hard to get a gradient. Next time better. Then I worked on the legs, where I just went in with lots of blues to push the gradient a little more and fixed it again with MSC. After the sealant layer dried, it was time for the actual blushing. A little on her shoulders, arms, neck, chest, belly button and so on, to give her body a little more realism. I also added another tattoo on her arm that matched the one on her cheek. One more layer of sealant and the last round of blushing. I painted the chorus with acrylic paint and went over everything with soft pastels again. Even though she's partly a turtle, I did not want to give her her carapace, so I decided to paint a big turtle tattoo on her back. I went straight in with my acrylic paint and just painted the forms as I felt. In my opinion, it turned out pretty good, considering I didn't plan this design at all. It even looks like a turtle! Now all the painting was done and I could go on with her head. But before that, let's take a closer look at her finished face up. I have to admit, I really like it. Now it was time to brush out her hair with the wired pad brush. I always start brushing at the end of the strands and work my way up to the roots. When everything was done, I took my flat iron to make the strands flat and shiny while going over them very carefully and slowly. At the end, I went through the whole hair with the brush again and it's done. I heated the plastic on the head with an ordinary hairdryer to reattach it to the body. Because of the head shrinking, I also had to cut the neck hole a little, but it worked pretty good and now she's back together. Before I could insert some eyes, I glued some lashes in her eye holes. For that, I used normal human-sized fake lashes and PVA glue that I applied with a toothpick. But speaking of eyes, we had to make some! I wanted to try something a little different this time by using my watercolor pencils for her iris. So I took these polymer clay bases and just went in with my colors. I had no idea if they would stay when I pour UV resin on top of them, or if everything would just melt color-wise, but I decided to try it. Choosing an eye color was pretty easy. Her face was very brown and orange, so I thought green eyes would give a good contrast. A little testing if they really fit in size, but it looked good so far. For the iris, I wanted to have a dark color on the outside and a light green in the middle. I even drew a black circle around the iris and added a little blue on the outermost circle, as you can see here. For her pupil, I experimented a little more this time off camera, but I'll show you my solution the next time. So now we have the doll with her lashes, that I will trim later, and her finished eyes. They look much better than my last eyes, don't you think? Making them this small is still new to me, but it seems like I'm making progress. I attached them on the head from the inside with epoxy clay and set everything to dry. I also glued her head cap back on and gave her some earrings I formed out of golden wire. As a last finishing touch, I always cover her lips and complete eyes with a high gloss varnish again. Now that the doll was done, she needed an outfit. I wanted to give her a blue skirt to symbolize the flowing water represented by her lower body, without hiding her coral legs. So I took some embroidery thread and connected two closure pieces to form a belt on which I glued these yarn strands. Fun fact! The name of this blue yarn was Lisa, which is my real name, and I think it's the most beautiful yarn I own. When the glue was dry, I could easily remove it from the plastic and cut off the excess. A little test dress up on my model doll before I added some lighter yarn on the top of the skirt to mimic the gradient on the legs. Next, she needed some panties that I created with the help of a tutorial I found on Watercolor's channel. Please check it out. This is the best fitting piece of clothes that I ever made, I guess. But it looked a little too less tropical, so I took some beads and sewed them on the front of the panties. Turned out pretty good, right? Inspired by the beads, I wanted to make her a fitting top, with bright orange beads to match the tropical theme. Moreover, the color reminded me of fruits, which was very fitting to the concept of upper body represents land with all the plants. And here's the result. Unlike the pants, there's no fabric involved, just thread and beads. I wanted to push the fruit concept a little more by adding some shoulder pads with leaves on them. For that, I took my model doll again, protected her with kitchen foil and started gluing some fabric around her shoulders. After the glue dried, it was easily to remove and cut into the right shape. Now the leaves, which were the same as in my decoration you always see in my videos. I just cut the leaves off the stamp and glued them with hot glue on the shoulder piece. The very last detail I wanted to add was a crown. I once saw my friends from Enchantarium making one with toothpicks, and I wanted to try this too. I do not have a 3D printer yet, so I had to use something different, like this plastic foil with toothpicks and hot glue. For the decoration, I had some white deco stones, leaves and these flowers that I cut and painted a little. I also had these polymer clay nail art deco pieces that I didn't end up using. First, I covered the whole bow with the stones, which was a little tricky because the plastic melted under the hot glue, but okay. I managed to get a good form. Then I glued the flowers on the crown and added the leaves everywhere. And now there really was everything together and just needed to be assembled. Here you can see her hand a little more in detail. I added the colors of her scales too as a tattoo, like the turtle on her back. Some editing magic, and here she is! Sadly, her tattoo is not really visible. I should have drawn it a little more on her shoulders, but overall I'm very proud of her. Her name will be Vanya, and like always, she has a story. In the small villages around the coast, where the fishermen live with their families, parents tell their children the fairy tale of Turtle Island since decades. The legend says that far away from all civilization, protected by the sea, there's a small island with white beaches, vivid plant life and the most colorful animals you can dream of. No human ever was able to set a foot on this island, but some sailors swear that they have seen the island all calm and peaceful in the middle of a giant storm, but they were unable to reach it. They say there was a beautiful woman with turtle scales on her face, legs of water and blooming hair walking on the beach. They called her Vanya, the goddess of Turtle Island. Once every year, people living near the sea come together to celebrate the giant turtle migration, when one very rare species is visible through the waves. They say it's the time when the animals start their journey to the small island to lay their eggs on the white beach. So a new generation of turtles can grow up and find their way back into the sea, all protected by the loving hands of their goddess Vanya. And that was her little story. I hope you liked it and the video in general. It was so much fun to be part of this giant collab, so a big thank you goes to Dollightful for hosting such a giant project. Check out her video and of course the slideshow if you haven't already. My next doll will be something special and I'll try to tackle the knee joint problem again, so it may take a little while. But it'll be worth the wait, I promise. Thank you all so much for your amazing support. See you soon. Cheers!